"We convinced your fiancé he deserved better and now he's marrying your sister," my mother said smugly. "Days before my wedding, she'll make him happier." My sister Sarah just grinned already, planning her own ceremony in our family's backyard. I couldn't help but laugh because they had no idea that my ex-fiancé Derek was about to discover that the FBI had been building a case against him for months. Let them have him. In 3 days he'd be wearing handcuffs instead of a wedding ring. 6 months earlier, my life felt like something straight out of a romantic movie. I was 28, working as a senior financial analyst at Morrison & Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious accounting firms. The autumn leaves were turning brilliant shades of gold along Michigan Avenue when Derek Hamilton walked into our conference room for a client consultation. Everything about Derek screamed success. His charcoal gray suit was perfectly tailored, his smile confident without being arrogant, and his handshake firm. He represented Pinnacle Investment Group, seeking our firm's expertise for a complex portfolio restructuring. As the lead analyst assigned to his account, I spent countless hours reviewing his investment strategies and financial projections. Derek possessed an almost magnetic charm that drew people toward him. During our initial meetings, he would arrive early just to chat about my weekend plans or ask thoughtful questions about my career goals. His interest felt genuine, refreshing after years of dating men who seemed more interested in talking about themselves than learning about me. Our first official date happened 3 weeks after we met. Derek picked me up in his sleek black BMW and took me to Alinea, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Throughout dinner, he demonstrated remarkable knowledge about fine wine, modern art, and international finance. When I mentioned that my family owned Hamilton Hotels, a small but successful chain of boutique properties throughout the Midwest, his eyes lit up with what I interpreted as admiration. The courtship that followed was nothing short of spectacular. Derek sent flowers to my office every Friday, always accompanied by handwritten notes that referenced inside jokes from our conversations. He planned elaborate weekend getaways to Napa Valley and Martha's Vineyard, places I had only dreamed of visiting. When we attended my company's annual gala, other colleagues whispered about how lucky I was to have found such a perfect man. Derek made it a point to integrate himself into my family dynamics with remarkable skill. During our first dinner at my parents' estate in Lake Forest, he complimented my mother Patricia on her exquisite taste in interior design and spent an hour discussing business strategy with my father Robert. He even brought a rare bottle of champagne that had been produced the year Sarah graduated from college, showing what appeared to be thoughtful consideration for family milestones. My sister Sarah, who was 25 and working as a freelance graphic designer, seemed immediately taken with Derek's sophisticated worldview. He would spend long conversations discussing art movements and creative expression topics that resonated deeply with her artistic sensibilities. At the time, I felt grateful that my family embraced him so warmly. The proposal came during Christmas dinner at our family estate. Derek had coordinated with my parents to hide the ring inside my grandmother's antique jewelry box, which Patricia presented as a special holiday tradition. When I opened the velvet-lined compartment and found the stunning 3-carat diamond surrounded by sapphires, the entire family erupted in celebration. Derek dropped to one knee right there in our formal dining room, with snow falling gently outside the tall windows and the fireplace crackling behind us. Planning our June wedding became a family affair. Derek insisted on being involved in every decision, from choosing the florist to selecting the reception venue. He suggested we hold the ceremony at the family estate, arguing that it would be more meaningful than any commercial location. During these planning sessions, he would often steer conversations toward the hotel business, asking detailed questions about financial operations and expansion plans. Looking back, I should have noticed the subtle signs that something was amiss. Derek always carried 2 cell phones, claiming one was for personal use and the other for business communications. He would frequently excuse himself during family gatherings to take important calls that couldn't wait. When I offered to help him organize his home office, he politely declined, explaining that he preferred to maintain his own filing system. 3 weeks before our wedding date, everything changed in an instant that would alter the course of my entire life. Derek had gone to his gym for his usual Monday evening workout, and I was alone in our shared apartment in Lincoln Park. While looking for our printer warranty information to resolve a technical issue, I accidentally knocked over a stack of files from Derek's desk drawer. As I gathered the scattered papers, my fingers brushed against what felt like a second laptop hidden behind a false back panel in his desk. The device was smaller than his primary computer, completely black, and secured with multiple passwords. After several attempts, I managed to access the login screen, using a combination of his birthday and mother's maiden name information he had shared during casual conversations.
What I discovered inside that computer changed everything I thought I knew about the man I planned to marry. Encrypted files revealed a sophisticated embezzlement scheme targeting his investment firm's high-net-worth clients. Derek had been systematically siphoning funds from retirement accounts, trust funds, and institutional portfolios for over 18 months. Spreadsheets detailed the theft of $2.3 million carefully distributed across multiple offshore accounts in countries with strict banking privacy laws.
But the financial crimes were only the beginning of his deception. Email communications showed Derek coordinating with known money launderers discussing strategies for converting stolen assets into untraceable cryptocurrency. Messages dated just days after our engagement revealed his true motivation for pursuing our relationship. In one particularly damning exchange, Derek wrote to an associate, "The hotel chain connection is perfect. Once we're married, I'll have legitimate access to their financial networks and can establish clean transfer routes through their international properties. The family trusts me completely. They'll never suspect anything until I'm long gone." My hands trembled as I read message after message detailing his escape plan. Derek had researched non-extradition countries, established false identities, and prepared multiple exit strategies. Our honeymoon destination, which he had insisted be the Cayman Islands, was actually chosen for its banking secrecy laws and proximity to his hidden assets. The most devastating revelation came in his final message thread, where Derek discussed accelerating his timeline due to increased federal scrutiny of his firm. He wrote, "The wedding date is perfect timing. By the time anyone realizes what happened, I'll be married to hotel money and disappearing to a beach where the FBI can't touch me." As I sat in our apartment staring at evidence of the elaborate con game that had consumed 18 months of my life, one thing became crystal clear. Derek Hamilton had never loved me. Every romantic gesture, every thoughtful gift, every family gathering had been carefully calculated steps toward financial devastation. My family's trust, my own feelings, and our future together were nothing more than tools in his criminal enterprise. The man I thought I was going to marry in 3 weeks was actually a federal fugitive who planned to use our marriage as the ultimate cover for his escape from justice. The manipulation began so subtly that none of us recognized it as it was happening. Derek possessed an almost supernatural ability to read people's insecurities and exploit them with surgical precision. Over the following weeks, as I secretly investigated his background, I began to understand how methodically he had orchestrated my family's betrayal. It started with carefully planted seeds of doubt during seemingly innocent conversations. During our regular Sunday dinners at the family estate, Derek would make offhand comments about how demanding my career had become. He'd mention to my mother Patricia how often I worked late or brought files home on weekends, framing it as concern for my work-life balance, rather than criticism of my dedication. Patricia, who had always harbored traditional views about women prioritizing family over career, began echoing Derek's concerns during our private conversations. She would suggest that maybe I was too focused on professional advancement and not enough on building a strong foundation for marriage. Derek's comments had given her permission to voice opinions she'd held back for years. With my father, Robert Derek employed a different strategy entirely. He would engage in lengthy discussions about business expansion and investment opportunities, gradually positioning himself as someone with valuable expertise that could benefit Hamilton Hotels. Derek would casually mention deals he'd structured for other family businesses, always emphasizing how the right financial partnerships could accelerate growth exponentially. Robert, who had built the hotel chain from a single property into a regional success story, was intrigued by Derek's apparent knowledge of high-level finance. During these conversations, Derek would subtly suggest that the business could benefit from someone with my sister Sarah's creative vision combined with his financial acumen. He painted a picture where Sarah's artistic background could revolutionize their marketing approach, while his connections opened doors to major investors. The manipulation of Sarah herself was perhaps Derek's most sophisticated operation. He began by showing genuine interest in her graphic design work, asking thoughtful questions about her creative process, and offering to introduce her to potential high-end clients. Sarah, who had always struggled to find her place in our achievement-oriented family, blossomed under Derek's attention and apparent respect for her talents. Derek would often stay after family gatherings to look at Sarah's latest portfolio pieces, offering praise and constructive feedback that demonstrated real understanding of visual aesthetics. He would mention how rare it was to find someone who could bridge the gap between artistic vision and business strategy skills that he claimed were essential for modern luxury hospitality. These one-on-one conversations gradually evolved into longer discussions about art philosophy and life goals. Derek positioned himself as someone who truly understood Sarah's desire to make a meaningful creative contribution to the world, in contrast to what he subtly implied was my more transactional approach to professional success. The psychological manipulation accelerated 3 months before our original wedding date. Derek began expressing subtle doubts about our compatibility to various family members, always framing his concerns as reluctant observations rather than complaints. He would mention to Patricia how I seemed stressed about the wedding planning, suggesting that perhaps I wasn't as excited about married life as I should be. To Robert, Derek confided his concerns about my apparent reluctance to discuss merging our financial assets, or my hesitation about taking his last name. He painted these perfectly reasonable precautions as signs that I wasn't fully committed to building a life together. With Sarah, Derek's approach was more emotional. He would share stories about feeling misunderstood or underappreciated, creating parallels to Sarah's own experiences of being overshadowed by my professional achievements. He would mention how refreshing it was to talk to someone who valued creativity and emotional connection over material success. The turning point came 6 weeks before our scheduled wedding. Derek orchestrated what appeared to be a spontaneous heart-to-heart conversation with Sarah after a family dinner. He had carefully maneuvered the situation so they would be alone in the garden, while I helped Patricia with dishes, and Robert took a business call. Derek told Sarah about his growing doubts regarding our relationship, explaining that he felt more like a trophy boyfriend than a true partner. He described feeling pressure to conform to my ambitious lifestyle, and mentioned how much more natural and comfortable he felt during their conversations about art and creativity. Sarah, who had developed genuine feelings for Derek over months of careful cultivation, found herself in the agonizing position of being confided in by the man she had grown to love about his relationship problems with her own sister. Derek's manipulation had created a situation where Sarah felt guilty about her feelings while simultaneously being encouraged to see herself as Derek's ideal match. The family intervention happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in April. Patricia had called a family meeting under the pretext of discussing final wedding arrangements, but the actual agenda was far different. Derek arrived looking appropriately somber, while Sarah appeared nervous and conflicted. Patricia took the lead, explaining that they had all been having serious conversations about whether Derek and I were truly compatible for marriage. She detailed concerns about my commitment to family life, my focus on career advancement, and what she characterized as my controlling tendencies in wedding planning. Robert, clearly uncomfortable, but convinced by Derek's financial projections for the hotel business, explained that he believed Derek would be better suited as a partner for Sarah, whose artistic vision could complement Derek's business expertise in ways that would benefit the entire family enterprise. Sarah spoke, last tears streaming down her face as she explained that she had developed feelings for Derek but had tried to suppress them out of loyalty to me. She described their conversations about art and creativity, their shared vision for combining aesthetic beauty with business success, and her belief that Derek had been forcing himself to fit into a relationship that wasn't naturally compatible. Derek's performance was masterful. He expressed confusion and anguish about the situation, claiming that he had only recently begun to realize that his feelings for Sarah were deeper than friendship. He insisted that he had tried to honor his commitment to me, but couldn't deny the authentic connection he felt with my sister. Throughout the intervention, Derek positioned himself as the reluctant participant in a situation that had developed naturally, despite everyone's best intentions. He suggested that perhaps it would be better for everyone if he and Sarah explored their connection honestly, rather than proceeding with a marriage that had begun to feel forced and inauthentic. The family presented their decision as a unified front. They believed Derek and Sarah were better suited for each other temperamentally, professionally, and emotionally. They suggested that I should be grateful for discovering this incompatibility before making a legal commitment that would be difficult to dissolve. Patricia concluded the meeting by announcing that they were prepared to transfer the wedding arrangements to Derek and Sarah, who would marry in 3 weeks as originally planned. The venue was already booked, the vendors were contracted, and the family believed it was better to celebrate a union that everyone could support wholeheartedly. As I sat in our formal living room surrounded by my family and the man I had planned to marry, I realized that Derek had achieved something remarkable. He had convinced my own family to betray me while making them believe they were acting in everyone's best interests, including my own. Derek had orchestrated a scenario where Sarah felt guilty about stealing her sister's fiancé, while simultaneously being convinced she was saving him from an inappropriate relationship. Patricia felt justified in her concerns about my priorities, while believing she was facilitating a more suitable match. Robert saw an opportunity to strengthen the family business, while supporting what appeared to be genuine love. None of them realized they were participating in an elaborate con game designed to provide Derek with the perfect cover for his planned escape from federal prosecution. Derek hadn't just stolen my fiancé and turned my family against me. He had made them all willing accomplices in their own deception. But what my family didn't know, and what Derek was about to discover, was that I had spent the previous 3 weeks building a case that would ensure his criminal empire came crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. The morning after my family's intervention, I woke up with absolute clarity about what needed to be done. While my heart was breaking from their betrayal, my mind was focused on a single goal: ensuring that Derek Hamilton faced the full consequences of his crimes without destroying my family in the process. I called in sick to work and spent the day developing a comprehensive strategy. The evidence I had discovered on Derek's hidden laptop was damning, but I needed to ensure it reached the appropriate authorities through channels that would protect my family's legitimate business operations from scrutiny. My first call was to Jennifer Martinez, a law school roommate who had joined the FBI's Financial Crimes Division after graduation. Jennifer and I had maintained our friendship over the years, and she had often shared stories about complex fraud cases during our occasional dinner meetings. When I explained that I had uncovered evidence of significant financial crimes, she agreed to meet me that evening at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. Jennifer's reaction to Derek's files was immediate and intense. She explained that Pinnacle Investment Group had been under preliminary investigation for irregularities in client reporting, but they lacked the concrete evidence needed to obtain search warrants. Derek's own records provided exactly what federal investigators needed to build an airtight case. However, Jennifer warned me about the complexity of the situation. Derek's crimes were federal offenses that carried significant prison sentences, but the investigation process would take weeks to unfold properly. More concerning was Derek's obvious sophistication in criminal planning, which suggested he had multiple escape routes prepared. We spent 3 hours that night developing a strategy that would protect my family while ensuring Derek's capture. Jennifer explained that federal investigators could use my evidence to obtain warrants for Derek's primary devices and financial records, but they needed to be careful not to spook him into immediate flight. The plan we developed was both elegant and terrifying. I would allow Derek's manipulation of my family to proceed as planned, giving him confidence that his cover remained intact. Meanwhile, Jennifer would coordinate with federal investigators to monitor Derek's movements, track his escape preparations, and time his arrest for maximum impact. My role would be to serve as an inside observer, documenting Derek's activities and providing real-time intelligence about his plans. Jennifer emphasized that this was dangerous territory. Derek had already demonstrated willingness to commit serious crimes, and cornered criminals often became unpredictable. Over the following days, I began living a double life that tested every acting ability I possessed. Around my family, I played the role of a heartbroken woman, gradually accepting the loss of her fiancé to her sister. I expressed appropriate sadness during conversations with Patricia and showed resigned understanding when Sarah tentatively discussed her growing feelings for Derek. Privately, I was conducting surveillance that would make professional investigators proud. I installed hidden recording software on Derek's devices during his regular gym visits, documented his financial transactions through careful observation of his banking activities, and tracked his movements using location data from the laptop he believed was secure. The evidence I gathered revealed the true scope of Derek's criminal enterprise. His embezzlement operation was far more sophisticated than I had initially realized. Derek had established financial relationships with corrupt banking officials in 3 different countries, created false investment products that existed only on paper, and developed a network of accomplices who specialized in converting stolen assets into untraceable forms. More disturbing was Derek's timeline for escape. According to his encrypted communications, he planned to complete his theft of family assets during the wedding weekend, when the chaos of celebration would provide perfect cover for his final transactions. Derek had calculated that his crimes wouldn't be discovered until several weeks after his honeymoon, giving him ample time to establish himself in a country without extradition treaties. The investigation also revealed Derek's backup plans for his backup plans. If his primary escape route was compromised, he had prepared alternative identities and financial arrangements that would allow him to disappear into a completely different region. Derek had studied federal investigation procedures and designed his criminal operation to exploit weaknesses in international law enforcement cooperation. As I compiled this information for Jennifer, I began to understand the magnitude of what Derek had attempted to accomplish. This wasn't a simple theft motivated by greed or desperation. Derek had planned to steal millions of dollars, destroy multiple families financially, and escape consequences entirely while leaving others to face legal scrutiny for his crimes. The most chilling discovery came when I found Derek's contingency plans for dealing with potential exposure. His files contained detailed research about framing accomplices for his crimes, including specific strategies for making other people appear responsible for transactions he had conducted. Derek had prepared to destroy innocent lives as casually as he planned to steal their money. During our second meeting, Jennifer explained that federal investigators were building parallel cases against Derek's accomplices while preparing to freeze his assets simultaneously across multiple jurisdictions. The operation required precise timing and coordination between agencies in several countries. She also warned me about something I hadn't considered: Derek's growing paranoia as the wedding date approached. Jennifer's colleagues had noticed increased security measures around Derek's communications and financial activities. He was clearly aware that federal investigators were circling, even if he didn't understand how close they had come to exposing him. This paranoia made Derek more dangerous and unpredictable. Jennifer insisted that I maintain normal behavior patterns while avoiding any actions that might trigger his suspicions. If Derek realized that his cover was blown, he might accelerate his escape timeline or take desperate measures to eliminate potential witnesses. The psychological pressure of maintaining my facade while knowing what Derek was planning became almost unbearable. During family dinners, I had to smile and make conversation with a man who was systematically planning to destroy us financially. I had to watch my sister fall deeper in love with someone who saw her as nothing more than a convenient tool for his escape. Sarah's genuine happiness was perhaps the most painful aspect of the entire situation. She had never been in love before, and her joy at finding someone who seemed to appreciate her artistic vision was heartbreaking to witness. Sarah spent hours planning their future together, discussing the creative projects they would pursue and the family they hoped to build. Patricia was equally invested in the match she believed she had facilitated. She spoke constantly about how much better Derek was suited for Sarah, how their personalities complemented each other perfectly, and how their combined talents would strengthen the family business. Patricia's satisfaction with her matchmaking efforts made her betrayal even more devastating. Robert, meanwhile, was already making plans to integrate Derek into Hamilton Hotel's executive structure. He discussed opening a new division focused on luxury event planning and artistic hospitality experiences, with Derek handling financial strategy and Sarah providing creative direction. Robert's excitement about expanding the business was genuine, which made Derek's planned theft even more cruel. As the wedding date approached, Derek's behavior became increasingly erratic, though he managed to hide most of his anxiety from my family. During our few remaining interactions, I noticed him checking his phone obsessively, starting conversations, and then losing focus midway through and displaying physical tension that seemed inconsistent with a happy groom. The breakthrough moment came when I discovered Derek's final phase preparations. He had begun liquidating assets that weren't directly connected to his primary theft operation, converting everything possible into forms that could be transferred quickly. Derek was clearly preparing for immediate escape, regardless of whether his wedding cover remained intact. Jennifer's team was ready to move, but they faced a critical decision about timing. Arresting Derek too early would allow his accomplices to escape and might compromise their ability to recover stolen assets. Waiting too long risked Derek detecting the investigation and fleeing before they could apprehend him. The decision was made to allow Derek's wedding plans to proceed, while federal agents positioned themselves to intercept his escape attempt. Derek's confidence in his own planning had become his weakness. He was so convinced that his manipulation had been successful that he wasn't prepared for the possibility that his victim had become his hunter. As I prepared to watch my sister marry a federal criminal, I held on to the knowledge that justice was finally within reach. Derek Hamilton had spent months orchestrating the perfect crime, but he was about to discover that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who bring you down. The transformation of my planned wedding into Sarah and Derek's celebration happened with breathtaking speed. Patricia threw herself into the project with an enthusiasm that would have been touching under different circumstances, treating the event as validation of her superior matchmaking instincts. Within 48 hours of the family intervention, our estate's garden was being redesigned according to Sarah's artistic vision. She wanted something completely different from the classic elegance I had chosen, opting instead for a bohemian aesthetic with flowing fabrics, wildflower arrangements, and string lights, creating an intimate atmosphere among the oak trees. The florist, caterer, and photographer were all contacted about the change in bride and groom. Sarah spent hours on conference calls explaining her preference for organic textures, natural color palettes, and unconventional decorative elements. Her excitement was infectious, and vendors seemed charmed by her creative energy and clear artistic vision. Derek played his role perfectly during these planning sessions. He deferred to Sarah's aesthetic choices while offering practical suggestions about logistics and timing. His behavior was that of a supportive fiancé who wanted nothing more than to make his bride's dreams come true, complete with thoughtful questions about her preferences and enthusiastic praise for her creativity. However, I began noticing subtle signs of Derek's increasing stress level during his unguarded moments. When he thought nobody was watching, his confident demeanor would slip, revealing glimpses of anxiety that contradicted his public persona. He would check his phone compulsively, step away to take private calls, and occasionally lose focus during conversations about wedding details. The most telling indicator was Derek's growing insistence on accessing family financial accounts. He suggested to Robert that combining their resources would allow for more elaborate honeymoon plans and post-wedding celebration expenses. Derek proposed establishing joint banking arrangements that would, he claimed, simplify their future business partnerships. Robert, still excited about integrating Derek into Hamilton Hotel's operations, agreed to these suggestions without recognizing their true purpose. Derek was positioning himself to complete his theft during the wedding weekend, when the family's attention would be focused on celebration rather than financial monitoring. Sarah remained blissfully unaware of Derek's financial maneuvering, interpreting his business discussions with Robert as evidence of his commitment to building a life together. She would beam with pride when Derek mentioned plans for their shared future, completely trusting his motives and intentions. During this period, I maintained my cover as the graciously displaced sister offering help with wedding preparations, while secretly documenting Derek's activities for Jennifer's investigation. The emotional toll of watching my family celebrate their betrayal of me while unknowingly facilitating Derek's criminal plans was almost overwhelming. The wedding dress situation provided a particularly surreal example of the family's new dynamics. Sarah couldn't wear my dress because of our different body types, so Patricia organized an emergency shopping expedition to find something suitable. They returned with a flowing ethereal gown that perfectly matched Sarah's artistic aesthetic, and Patricia spent the evening explaining how much more appropriate it was than my original choice. Meanwhile, Derek was busy implementing the final phase of his escape plan. I observed him making encrypted calls during his morning runs, receiving packages at work that he didn't bring home, and spending unusual amounts of time at his bank, conducting what he described as routine account maintenance. The most disturbing discovery came when I found evidence that Derek had been researching my family's personal financial information far beyond what would be necessary for wedding planning. He had obtained detailed records of Robert's business accounts, Patricia's investment portfolio, and even Sarah's modest savings from her design work. Derek's plan was more comprehensive than I had initially understood. He wasn't just planning to steal from his investment firm clients and disappear with wedding money. Derek intended to completely devastate Hamilton Hotel's finances, leaving my family bankrupt while he established a luxurious new life in a non-extradition country. The revelation that Derek planned to destroy my family's lifetime of work added a personal dimension to my cooperation with federal investigators that went beyond protecting them from an embarrassing association with a criminal. Derek was planning to steal their future, their security, and their legacy as thoroughly as he had stolen their trust. Jennifer's updates during this period confirmed that Derek's criminal network was more extensive than we had initially realized. Federal investigators had identified at least 12 other families who had been targeted by similar schemes, with total losses exceeding $30 million. Derek wasn't just a thief. He was part of an organized criminal enterprise that specialized in infiltrating wealthy families through romantic manipulation. The coordination required to arrest all the network members simultaneously meant that timing was critical. Federal agents were positioned in multiple cities waiting for the signal to move against Derek's accomplices, while ensuring that none of them could warn the others or escape with stolen assets. As the wedding week arrived, Derek's behavior became increasingly erratic, though he continued hiding his anxiety from Sarah and the rest of my family. I noticed him having heated phone conversations in languages I didn't recognize, making unusual requests for cash advances from the family business, and demonstrating physical symptoms of stress that suggested his confidence was cracking. The breaking point came 3 days before the wedding when Derek attempted to access Patricia's personal safe in our family home's study. He claimed to be looking for family heirloom jewelry that Sarah might wear during the ceremony, but I knew from Jennifer's briefings that Derek was actually seeking documents that would give him access to additional family assets. When Patricia discovered Derek in her study after midnight examining documents that had nothing to do with jewelry, she initially interpreted his behavior as romantic eagerness to honor family traditions. Derek's explanation about wanting to surprise Sarah with something meaningful was accepted without question, demonstrating how completely my family had been manipulated. However, I recognized Derek's true purpose and immediately contacted Jennifer with details about what he had accessed. The safe contained financial documents, business contracts, and personal information that Derek could use to expand his theft beyond the immediate wedding-related accounts. Jennifer's response was swift and decisive. Federal investigators accelerated their timeline, recognizing that Derek was moving faster than they had anticipated. The wedding would proceed as planned, but agents would be positioned to prevent Derek from completing his escape regardless of how the ceremony unfolded. The final wedding preparations took place against the backdrop of Derek's increasingly desperate attempts to position himself for maximum theft and minimum detection. He suggested last-minute changes to banking arrangements, proposed elaborate honeymoon plans that required immediate fund transfers, and expressed sudden urgency about completing business partnerships that had supposedly been in discussion for months. Sarah interpreted Derek's increased intensity as excitement about their future together, never suspecting that her fiancé was actually preparing to disappear, with everything her family had spent generations building. Her trust in Derek remained absolute, even as he implemented plans that would destroy everything she loved. As I watched the final preparations for Sarah's wedding to a man who planned to bankrupt our family and flee the country within 72 hours, I found strength in knowing that justice was finally within reach. Derek Hamilton had orchestrated an elaborate con game that had fooled everyone who cared about me, but his victim had become his hunter. The wedding day would bring either Derek's greatest triumph or his complete downfall. After months of careful planning and federal coordination, we were about to discover whether justice could prevail against manipulation, whether truth could overcome deception, and whether love could survive the revelation of ultimate betrayal. The morning before Sarah's wedding dawned crisp and clear with the kind of perfect weather that makes outdoor ceremonies feel magical. While my family bustled around the estate making final preparations, Derek began executing what he believed would be the culminating triumph of his elaborate criminal scheme. I woke at 5:30 to find Derek's BMW already gone from the driveway. According to the itinerary Sarah had shared with the family, he was supposed to be picking up his groomsmen and handling last-minute tuxedo adjustments. In reality, as I discovered through Jennifer's surveillance updates, Derek was making his final preparations for international flight. His first stop was a private mailbox facility in downtown Chicago, where he retrieved a package containing falsified passport documents and identification cards bearing multiple aliases. Derek had spent months establishing these alternative identities through contacts in his criminal network, creating complete backstories and financial histories for each persona. From there, Derek proceeded to 3 different banks, where he executed a series of complex transactions designed to convert his stolen assets into untraceable forms. He liquidated accounts that my family didn't even know existed, transferred funds through multiple international intermediaries, and positioned everything for immediate access from his planned destination. The sophistication of Derek's financial maneuvering was remarkable even by federal investigation standards. He had established cryptocurrency wallets, offshore investment vehicles, and precious metals depositories that could be accessed from anywhere in the world. Derek's escape plan included enough redundant systems and backup options to survive almost any law enforcement action. However, Derek had made one critical error in his planning. His confidence in manipulating my family had led him to underestimate me entirely. While he was executing his financial escape preparations, I was providing real-time intelligence to federal agents who were documenting every transaction, every communication, and every movement. Jennifer's team had positioned surveillance assets at each location Derek visited, capturing evidence that would support charges of money laundering, wire fraud, and international criminal conspiracy. Derek's own actions were providing prosecutors with an ironclad case that would ensure maximum sentencing under federal guidelines. Meanwhile, at the family estate, wedding preparations continued with the kind of joyful chaos that makes such events memorable. Sarah was radiant as she worked with the florist to create the perfect arrangements, her artistic vision transforming our garden into something that looked like a fairy tale setting. Patricia coordinated vendor arrivals with military precision, ensuring that every detail matched Sarah's creative specifications, while maintaining the elegant standards expected at Hamilton family events. Her satisfaction with facilitating what she believed was a perfect romantic match was evident in every interaction with wedding professionals. Robert spent the morning reviewing final arrangements for Derek's integration into Hamilton Hotel's operations. He had prepared contracts that would give Derek significant authority over financial decisions, completely unaware that his future son-in-law was planning to use that access to steal everything the family had built. The irony of Robert's trust was particularly painful to observe. He spoke with genuine excitement about Derek's business acumen and the opportunities their partnership would create for expansion into luxury markets. Robert had convinced himself that Sarah's marriage would strengthen every aspect of their family enterprise. During this time, Derek's behavior became increasingly erratic as the pressure of maintaining his cover while executing his escape plan took its toll. When he returned to the estate around noon, his usual confident demeanor was replaced by barely concealed anxiety that manifested in nervous energy and distracted responses to simple questions. Sarah, however, interpreted Derek's agitation as normal pre-wedding nerves, finding his vulnerability endearing rather than suspicious. She spent extra time reassuring him about their future together, completely unaware that Derek's anxiety stemmed from fear of federal prosecution rather than concerns about marriage. The afternoon brought Derek's boldest and most desperate move yet. While Sarah was upstairs getting her hair and makeup done, Derek approached Robert about accessing the family's primary business accounts for what he claimed were urgent pre-honeymoon financial arrangements. Derek explained that his bank had flagged some international transactions as potentially suspicious due to their size and destination requiring additional documentation that could only be provided through established business relationships. He suggested that temporarily routing their honeymoon funds through Hamilton Hotel's accounts would resolve the banking concerns while demonstrating the family's confidence in their new partnership. Robert, who had spent decades building relationships based on trust and handshake agreements, agreed to Derek's request without hesitation. He provided account numbers, authorization codes, and access credentials that Derek could use to transfer substantial sums without triggering additional banking scrutiny. What Robert didn't realize was that Derek planned to use this access to steal far more than honeymoon funds. Derek's research into Hamilton Hotel's financial structure had revealed that the family kept significant liquid assets in operational accounts to maintain flexibility for property acquisitions and seasonal fluctuations. Derek's plan was to transfer the maximum possible amounts to accounts he controlled, then use the chaos and celebration of the wedding reception to delay discovery of the theft until after he had fled the country. By the time anyone realized what had happened, Derek would be establishing residence in a jurisdiction where extradition was practically impossible. As Derek implemented these final preparations for his escape, federal agents were positioning themselves around the estate and monitoring his electronic communications. Jennifer had coordinated with local law enforcement to ensure that Derek couldn't leave the property without being observed and tracked. The surveillance operation required extraordinary precision, because Derek had demonstrated sophisticated counter-surveillance awareness throughout his criminal career. Federal agents had to maintain constant observation while avoiding detection by someone who was actively looking for signs of investigation. During the late afternoon, Derek made his most telling mistake. While checking his encrypted communications in what he believed was the privacy of the estate's guest bathroom, Derek received a message that caused him to panic visibly. Someone in his criminal network had been arrested in another city, and Derek realized that federal investigators were moving against his entire organization simultaneously. The message warned Derek that law enforcement agencies were coordinating a multi-jurisdictional operation targeting financial fraud networks, with arrests planned across several states and countries. Derek's confidence in his escape plan was shaken by the realization that investigators had penetrated deeper into his criminal organization than he had anticipated. Derek's response to this intelligence was swift and decisive. He accelerated his escape timeline planning to complete his theft of family assets during the wedding reception, rather than waiting for the following morning as originally planned. Derek began making arrangements for immediate departure regardless of how his sudden absence might appear to Sarah and the family. However, Derek had failed to consider that his encrypted communications were no longer secure. Federal investigators had been monitoring his network traffic for weeks, providing them with advance warning of his accelerated plans and allowing them to adjust their operation accordingly. As evening approached and wedding guests began arriving at the estate, Derek was trapped in a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his control. His criminal network was being systematically dismantled, his escape timeline was compressed beyond reasonable execution, and federal agents were closing in from multiple directions. Yet Derek still believed that his manipulation of my family provided sufficient cover for his escape. He was confident that their trust in him would prevent them from recognizing his criminal activities until after he had disappeared with their money and left them to face the legal consequences of their association with a federal fugitive. Derek Hamilton was about to discover that sometimes the people you underestimate most are the ones who orchestrate your downfall. The wedding reception that was supposed to provide cover for his escape would instead become the setting for his arrest and the exposure of everything he had done to destroy the family that had trusted him. Justice was finally within reach, and Derek's elaborate con game was about to come crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. The morning of Sarah's wedding arrived with the kind of pristine weather that photographers dream about and brides pray for. Golden sunlight filtered through the oak trees in our estate's garden, where white chairs were arranged in perfect rows facing an archway covered in Sarah's beloved wildflowers and flowing fabric. By 8 in the morning, vendors were arriving to complete the final setup. The catering team began arranging tables under the reception tent, the string quartet conducted their sound check near the ceremony site, and the photographer captured images of the beautiful setting before guests arrived. Derek appeared at the estate around 9, accompanied by his groomsmen, all of whom seemed genuinely excited to celebrate what they believed was a joyful union. Derek's best man was his college roommate Marcus, a lawyer from New York who had flown in specifically for the wedding. Marcus spent the morning joking about Derek's nervousness and offering unsolicited advice about marriage based on his own recent engagement. What Marcus and the other groomsmen didn't know was that Derek's nervousness had nothing to do with wedding jitters and everything to do with the federal investigation closing around him. Derek's hands shook as he adjusted his tie. His face was pale despite the warm sunshine, and his attempts at casual conversation were stilted and unconvincing. Sarah, meanwhile, was absolutely radiant. Her wedding dress flowed like water, her hair was styled in an effortless arrangement that perfectly complemented her artistic aesthetic, and her smile was bright enough to power the entire celebration. She moved through her morning preparations with the kind of joy that makes weddings feel magical for everyone involved. Patricia was in her element as mother of the bride, coordinating last-minute details, while basking in the satisfaction of having facilitated what she believed was a perfect romantic match. She greeted arriving guests with stories about Derek and Sarah's artistic compatibility, their shared vision for the future, and how much happier this marriage would make everyone compared to my supposedly unsuitable engagement. Robert spent the morning playing host to Derek's family members who had traveled from various parts of the country to attend the ceremony. Derek's parents were charming, educated people who spoke warmly about their son's success in finance and expressed genuine happiness about his marriage to someone from such a wonderful family. The cruel irony was that Derek's parents were completely unaware of their son's criminal activities. They had been deceived as thoroughly as my own family, believing Derek's stories about legitimate business success and authentic romantic feelings. Their pride in attending their son's wedding was heartbreaking to witness, knowing what was about to unfold. As guests continued arriving throughout the morning, Derek's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would engage in conversations for a few minutes before excusing himself to take urgent phone calls. He checked his watch obsessively, and his responses to simple questions were often delayed or inappropriate. Around 11:30, Derek made his most desperate move yet. While Sarah was upstairs having final touch-ups done to her makeup, Derek approached Robert about completing the financial arrangements they had discussed the previous day. Derek claimed that his bank required immediate confirmation of the transfers to avoid delays that could affect their honeymoon travel plans. Robert, who was busy greeting arriving guests and managing wedding logistics, agreed to handle the transfers immediately, rather than risk any disruption to Derek and Sarah's celebration. He provided Derek with access to his home office computer and the authorization codes needed to complete the transactions. Derek's hands trembled as he accessed Hamilton Hotel's primary accounts, but his theft was methodical and sophisticated. He transferred $800,000 to accounts he controlled, carefully structuring the transactions to appear like legitimate business expenses that wouldn't trigger immediate banking alerts. What Derek didn't know was that federal agents had positioned themselves throughout the estate disguised as additional catering staff, security personnel, and even wedding guests. Agent Martinez was working as the head caterer, wearing a professional uniform and coordinating food service while monitoring Derek's movements and communications. The breakthrough moment came when Derek accessed Robert's computer to complete his theft. Federal surveillance equipment captured every keystroke, every transaction, and every account number Derek used. The evidence being gathered would support charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and computer intrusion that carried decades of potential prison time. At 12:15, just 45 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Derek received the message that shattered his remaining composure. His primary accomplice in the Cayman Islands had been arrested by international authorities, effectively cutting off Derek's escape route and freezing the offshore accounts where he had planned to transfer stolen funds. Derek's response was immediate and desperate. He realized that his entire criminal enterprise was collapsing simultaneously, leaving him trapped at a wedding where federal agents were undoubtedly closing in. Derek began making frantic phone calls to alternative contacts, trying to establish backup escape routes that could be implemented within hours. However, Derek's encrypted communications were no longer secure, and federal investigators were monitoring every call, every message, and every desperate attempt to salvage his escape plan. Derek's own technology had become a trap that provided law enforcement with real-time intelligence about his activities and intentions. The wedding ceremony began promptly at 1 o'clock with guests seated in the garden, while Sarah and Derek exchanged vows under the wildflower archway. Sarah's happiness was luminous as she recited promises to love, honor, and cherish the man she believed would be her lifetime partner. Derek's performance during the ceremony was remarkable considering his internal panic. He managed to deliver his vows with appropriate emotion, smile for the photographer, and maintain the appearance of a joyful groom throughout the traditional elements of the service. But I could see the fear in Derek's eyes when he thought nobody was watching. His hand shook when he placed the ring on Sarah's finger. His voice cracked during his vows, and his smile never quite reached his eyes. Derek was going through the motions of marriage while planning his immediate escape from federal prosecution. The reception began immediately after the ceremony, with guests moving to the tent area for cocktails and celebration. Derek and Sarah made their rounds, greeting family and friends, accepting congratulations and posing for photographs that would later serve as evidence in federal court proceedings. Around 3:30, Derek made his final desperate play. He approached Sarah about leaving early for their honeymoon, claiming that he had arranged a surprise romantic evening that required immediate departure. Derek suggested they could slip away quietly while guests were enjoying the reception, making their exit seem spontaneous and romantic rather than suspicious. Sarah was torn between her desire to spend time celebrating with family and friends and her excitement about beginning their honeymoon adventure. Derek's urgency was persuasive, and Sarah began considering whether they could make their exit without seeming rude to the people who had gathered to celebrate their marriage. However, Derek's plan was interrupted when Agent Martinez approached their table ostensibly to discuss catering arrangements for the remainder of the reception. In reality, she was positioning herself to prevent Derek from leaving the property, while additional agents moved into arrest positions. The moment of truth arrived at 4:15, when Derek excused himself from the reception to retrieve something from his car. As he walked across the estate's parking area, federal agents emerged from their concealment positions, surrounding Derek with weapons drawn and voices commanding him to stop and raise his hands. Derek's first instinct was to run, but he quickly realized that escape was impossible. Federal agents had positioned themselves at every possible exit from the estate, ensuring that Derek couldn't flee regardless of which direction he chose. As Derek was handcuffed and read his rights, the celebration behind us came to a confused halt. Guests could see law enforcement activity in the parking area, but most couldn't understand what was happening or why federal agents had interrupted a wedding reception. Sarah's scream when she realized Derek was being arrested was heartbreaking. She ran toward the parking area, demanding to know what was happening and insisting that there had been some terrible mistake. Her wedding dress flowed behind her as she tried to reach Derek, not understanding why the man she had just married was being treated like a criminal. Patricia and Robert were equally shocked, demanding explanations from agents who were focused on securing Derek and preserving evidence. The family's confusion and horror were genuine, as they struggled to understand how their perfect wedding had suddenly become a federal crime scene. Derek's final manipulation attempt was perhaps his cruelest. As agents prepared to transport him for booking and initial questioning, Derek shouted accusations at Sarah, claiming that she had been his accomplice in the financial crimes and that the stolen money had been used to pay for their wedding celebration. Derek's desperate attempt to frame Sarah was supported by documents he had forged bearing her signature financial records, showing transfers to accounts supposedly under her control and communications, suggesting her involvement in planning the theft of her own family's money. For a terrifying moment, it appeared that Derek's final con game might succeed. Federal agents examined the documents Derek provided, and Sarah's protests of innocence seemed hollow in the face of apparently concrete evidence of her complicity. However, Derek's desperation had led him to make a critical error. The forged documents contained information that only the actual perpetrator could have known, including account numbers and transaction codes that had never been shared with Sarah or any other family member. Agent Martinez was able to demonstrate immediately that Derek's accusations were fabricated, protecting Sarah from prosecution while sealing Derek's fate as surely as his own criminal arrogance. Derek's attempt to destroy an innocent woman as his final act of revenge had instead provided the last piece of evidence needed to ensure his conviction. As federal agents led Derek away in handcuffs, he turned back toward the reception tent, where my family stood in shocked silence. The man who had spent months manipulating their emotions and exploiting their trust was finally revealed as the criminal he had always been. Derek Hamilton's elaborate con game was over. His theft had been stopped, his escape plan had been thwarted, and his attempt to frame Sarah had backfired spectacularly. Justice had finally caught up with someone who believed he was too clever to face consequences for his actions. 3 months later, I stood in the same garden where Sarah's wedding had taken place, but the atmosphere was completely different. The federal investigation had concluded Derek had been convicted on multiple felony charges, and our family was finally beginning to heal from the trauma of his elaborate betrayal. Derek Hamilton was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The judge cited the sophisticated nature of his crimes, the extensive harm caused to multiple families, and his complete lack of remorse as factors justifying the maximum sentence under federal guidelines. Derek's criminal network was dismantled entirely, with his accomplices receiving sentences ranging from 8 to 12 years. The financial recovery exceeded everyone's expectations. Federal investigators were able to trace and recover nearly all of the money Derek had stolen from Hamilton hotels, his investment firm clients, and other victims of his schemes. Derek's offshore accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, and hidden assets were seized and returned to their rightful owners through a process that took months to complete, but ultimately provided full restitution. Sarah's recovery from Derek's betrayal was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of our family's healing process. Initially, she was devastated by the revelation that the man she loved had never existed except as an elaborate persona designed to facilitate financial crimes. Sarah blamed herself for failing to recognize Derek's deception and questioned whether she could ever trust her judgment about people again. However, Sarah's artistic nature proved to be her greatest strength during the healing process. She channeled her anger and pain into a series of paintings that explored themes of deception, manipulation, and ultimate triumph over betrayal. The artwork was powerful enough to earn her representation by a prestigious gallery in Chicago, launching the professional art career she had always dreamed about. Patricia's transformation was equally profound. The realization that her favoritism toward Sarah and criticism of my career focus had made our family vulnerable to Derek's manipulation forced Patricia to confront aspects of her personality that she had never acknowledged. She entered counseling to address her issues with control and learned to appreciate both daughters for their individual strengths rather than trying to force them into predetermined roles. Patricia's apology to me was genuine and heartfelt. She acknowledged that her concerns about my priorities had been rooted in her own insecurities, rather than legitimate worries about my happiness. Patricia admitted that Derek had exploited her traditional views about women's roles to turn her against me, and she expressed deep regret for participating in his manipulation. Robert's response to the situation demonstrated the business acumen that had built Hamilton Hotels into a successful enterprise. He immediately implemented security measures to protect the company from future infiltration attempts, established oversight procedures for all financial partnerships, and created protocols for thoroughly investigating anyone seeking close association with family members or business operations. More importantly, Robert recognized that my cooperation with federal investigators had saved the family from complete financial ruin. He offered me a position as Chief Financial Officer of Hamilton Hotels, acknowledging that my analytical skills and ethical standards made me the ideal person to protect the company's future interests. The new role allowed me to combine my accounting expertise with my commitment to family legacy, creating a career path that satisfied both my professional ambitions and my desire to contribute to something larger than myself. Robert and I developed a close working relationship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to ethical business practices. My personal life also evolved in unexpected ways during this period. The FBI consultant who had worked on Derek's case, a brilliant investigator named James, began visiting me regularly during the recovery process. Initially, his visits were professional, focused on tying up loose ends and ensuring that all evidence was properly documented. However, James and I discovered that we shared interests in financial analysis, criminal psychology, and ethical philosophy that went far beyond our professional connection. James appreciated my intelligence and integrity in ways that Derek's manipulation had never allowed, recognizing my strengths, rather than trying to exploit perceived weaknesses. Our relationship developed slowly and honestly, built on genuine compatibility rather than calculated charm. James understood the trauma I had experienced and respected my need to rebuild trust gradually. His patience and authenticity provided a stark contrast to Derek's elaborate deception, allowing me to heal while learning to love again. The family's Sunday dinners became cherished traditions where we discussed our individual growth and collective healing. Sarah would share stories about her artistic projects and the gallery's plans for her upcoming exhibition. Patricia would talk about insights from her counseling sessions and her efforts to become a more supportive mother. Robert would update us about hotel business developments and his plans for expansion based on sound financial principles. These conversations allowed us to process Derek's betrayal while building stronger relationships based on honest communication and mutual support. We learned to value each other's perspectives rather than trying to force conformity to predetermined expectations. The most satisfying aspect of our recovery was the knowledge that Derek's crimes had ultimately brought our family closer together, rather than destroying us as he had intended. His manipulation had exposed weaknesses in our relationships that we were able to address and strengthen through conscious effort and professional guidance. Derek's conviction also provided closure for the dozens of other families he had targeted through similar schemes. Federal prosecutors used his case as a blueprint for investigating organized financial fraud networks, leading to additional arrests and recoveries that protected potential future victims. The life lesson that emerged from our experience was profound and lasting. True family bonds cannot be manufactured through manipulation or destroyed through deception. Genuine love and trust must be earned through consistent behavior over time, not claimed through elaborate performances or calculated charm. We learned that protecting people we care about sometimes requires difficult decisions and painful revelations. My choice to cooperate with federal investigators rather than expose Derek myself allowed my family to experience the full consequences of their choices while ensuring that justice was ultimately served. The experience taught us to value authenticity over perfection, substance over appearance, and integrity over convenience. Derek's elaborate con game had ultimately failed because it was built on lies that could not withstand careful scrutiny or survive contact with people who prioritized truth over comfort. As I reflect on everything that happened, I'm grateful for the strength I found to fight back against someone who believed he could manipulate and discard people without consequences. Derek Hamilton learned that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who bring you down, and that justice may be delayed, but it cannot be avoided forever. Our family emerged from Derek's betrayal stronger, wiser, and more committed to building relationships based on genuine care and mutual respect, rather than superficial charm and calculated manipulation. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone's true character was revealed in a shocking way? How did you handle discovering that someone you trusted was not who they appeared to be? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help others find it. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming betrayal and finding justice in difficult situations. And don't forget to share this with anyone who might need to hear that sometimes fighting back is the only way to protect the people you love. Thank you for listening to this difficult but ultimately hopeful story about family betrayal and the triumph of truth over deception. Remember that your instincts matter, your family's protection is worth fighting for, and justice is always worth pursuing, no matter how powerful your opponent appears to be.